more shadow fiends he could see in the distance. The road itself seemed relatively harmless, though. It was odd. Oh, that was a giant. That is a giant. Right then, that's much more threatening than some shadows. Victor had to think quickly. It was probably time to tap into the power of his staff once again. It's also probably time to enhance himself in other ways. Using the power of the ring that he'd created would also help quite a bit, likely. It would be faster than using his spells. Quickly now. He wasn't sure if that giant had seen him, but he certainly didn't want to try to tangle with it. Oh, it certainly had. Quickly, Victor, quickly. And then hope. Oh. It was clearly a shadow giant. Victor didn't even know that was a thing that existed. But here they were. Oh, even with all the defensive benefits he'd given himself, one hit had... Oh. Well then. Not exactly what he'd expected. As the giant faded into darkness, it left behind the axe it had been wielding. A large stone axe that appeared to be of crude make, adorned by giant feathers. It was no wonder that it had damaged him so. It was very potent against humans. Well, he supposed it would be worth breaking down to learn its enchantments, perhaps. And now, as enhanced as he was, it would be a pity to waste the abilities. He needed to move quickly. The spells would only last for so long. Oof. Well, that had been his first big scare. It felt odd saying that he'd managed to kill a giant. Magically enhanced or no, that was usually not a fight a single human could handle. Perhaps he'd been underestimating himself. He still didn't think he was on the same level as, say, Drogon, but maybe he was more skilled and powerful than he'd been giving himself credit for. In each battle, he was gaining a bit more confidence in his abilities. It was difficult to have such a thing when he had failed so many, though. More and more Shadowvar kept appearing, all ghosts of their former selves. At this point, Victor was almost certain that the Shadow Fiends were what happened when the Shadowvar or just individual that came from the material plane as well lingered in the Shadow Plane for too long. Perhaps that explained why the Shadow Lich himself had become, essentially, a glorified Shadow Fiend. And it made him all the more eager to find a way out of this plane of existence. He simply couldn't risk the idea of slowly losing himself like these individuals had. It was all the encouragement he needed, really. Another portal. Part of him wanted to enter, but the other part was loath to just continue hopping areas like this. Perhaps that was one of the difficulties of exploring the Shadow Realms. It was near impossible to get a solid sense of direction. He'd used quite a bit of his spells charged as well. Perhaps this portal could return him to the estate. Reaching out and touching it, he could feel the directions that the plane was ripping. And if he imposed his will on it enough, he could see his estate forming in the distance. Pushing himself toward it, and he would find himself stepping out of the shadow door that he'd entered before. Curious. Well, he had certainly got a bit of practice in. He'd gotten a better estimation of his abilities. Now he needed to work on what magic he had memorized, as well as rememorize his spells and better prepare himself. Thankfully, the Lich's room was perfect for that, along with the bound portal. First, he would take a moment to study his spell book and see what he could replace different spells with. Magic Missile was useless. Burning Hands was also useless. It couldn't be properly used. Perhaps Negative Energy Ray? It wouldn't be useful against the shadows, but any that hadn't fallen that far into practical undeath, it would be useful. Frankly, it seemed the only decent option. Now, Color Spray was tempting. It could buy him time and make it easier for him to bombard them. But the undead were immune to such effects anyway. Negative Energy Raid would be. I had to thank the different scrolls he had learned. Speaking of, it was worth going over those that he had gained just to make sure he had nothing more to learn. And there was at least one. And it seemed it was only that one, however. Fair enough. That was still something to add to his spellbook. Now, replacing the magic missiles he'd memorized with that would help. It was clear that Ghostly Visage did not work in this realm. So he could replace it with either another Melf's Acid Arrow, or perhaps something to enhance his physical state so that he'd be more adept at physical confrontations. Might not be a terrible idea. Yes, that was something at least. It would help him use the staff more efficiently. Now, Negative Energy Burst is what he'd memorized in preparation, but he hadn't expected actual undead shadows to attack. Considering one of his spells already would heal them, he was hesitant. Fireball wouldn't work. He wasn't sure if lightning bolt would. Flame arrow wouldn't. It was worth attempting them at least. And so he'd replace them with that. He meant to test the elemental shield, but he'd been in a panic. If the ice storm works instead of the lesser missile storm, it would be superior. The energy buffer would be excellent for dealing with the negative energy of this plane still. The Mastill's acid sheath would be beneficial to a degree, but he had to wonder if Cone of Cold would be better. For now, he'd leave it be. Tense's transformation actually seemed a bit tempting at this point. The only downside was he couldn't use his spells while he was transformed. It was a difficult choice. Considering his base abilities, I think he'd go without it. And instead look into something like... Considering his armor already does 3 and below, the difference between 4 isn't that major. Yeah, I think instead of the Glow of Invulnerability, True Seeing will probably come... No, his ring already grants him that ability. Perhaps just Greater Stone Skin. Or more of the Greater Missile Storms, since his staff already provides him with Greater Stone Skin. Seems fine. And then the Shadow Shield was what I chose originally. Prismatic Spray is nice, but it's too hit or miss, and also Victor doesn't know if it works in this area. I think we're going to go with the summoning for that one. That way he's not entirely reliant on his staff. Alright, with his new spells chosen, Victor will then rest. Take the time to rememorize his spells and catch his breath while thinking about the area that he's now found himself in. The chaotic jumble that is the Shadow Realms around him. Now that he's regained his footing and is painfully aware that there are shadow giants, apparently, Victor wants to try to use this portal now, wherever it's gone. There. Touching it once more, he could see the grove that he'd been in moments before. Pushing through it, and he found himself in a different area of them. Perhaps this led back into it? But no, there was nothing there. It felt like stepping off into a precipice in many ways. Well, then what was this way? Walls? Man-made? No, it could have been anything. Beetles. Glowing beetles at that. They looked similar to fire beetles, but different? Perhaps a specific subspecies only found in this dimension? So many unknowns. There didn't appear to be any more threats in the area, though. It was odd, he'd gotten used to that. And the Shadowvar popping up every other turn. A cave of some sort. Now, what was in this direction, though? Exploration was difficult when you couldn't even see the light in front of you. At a glance, it seems... corrupted dire wolves. Well, this was a good chance to test out electricity. And apparently it worked perfectly. They weren't actually nearly as threatening as he'd assumed. He wasn't sure if he was just in a safer area of the Shadow Plains, or all of the Shadow Plains were like this. Seemed unlikely. Logically speaking, if we use any plane as an example, some areas are more dangerous than others. Perhaps he just got lucky. Well, if that's so, Victor certainly won't turn it down. Now, would this cave actually lead into a cave, or would it take him somewhere else yet again? There truly was no logic in this place. It felt like he'd fallen through the darkness. How odd. He wasn't even certain. He would have to go through that portal again if he wanted to explore that, he supposed. This was a very large tree. Another shadow tremor, he supposed he could call them? More Shadowvar. Luckily, it appeared that once he put them down, they stayed down, so that was something at least. That also encouraged his theory. Every little bit of help on easing his guilt he would accept. Though frankly, it had been proven at this point with how they just wandered about as their fellows were cut down. Well, that wasn't something he'd expected. What in the nine hells was that? Well... And what was that? A basilisk? If he was hit by that, he was doomed. Well, let it keep firing it off into the darkness, he supposed. At least this giant shadow beast thing wasn't as threatening as he'd assumed. He thought he'd been stumbled upon by another giant. Okay, now where were these damn basilisks? Okay, you stay right over there. You too. Now, how intelligent were they actually going to be? Thankfully, he was staying out of range for now. Oh, nope, 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 nope. Nice and distant. There we are. Where's that other one? There are those beetles again. Luckily, the range of its actual petrification gaze seemed identical to a true basilisk's. It made this much easier. Right then, hadn't there been a third somewhere? Did it just wander off? No, it was right there. It was very difficult to see in the light. Well, lack thereof, he suppose, was the more accurate term. Right then. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see future content, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon. If you'd like access to bonus content, such as special privileges on my personal Discord, extra information on my stories and world building, or perhaps simply wish to support my work here, please consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Thank you for all your time, and I can't wait to see you in the next chapter of our story.